Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and blessings on all His noble messengers, in particular on the last of them all, the Blessed Prophet Muhammad. Allah's blessings be upon him as we greet you on this, the very first day of the month of Rajab, in the year 1447. With Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And it is a holiday season here in Trinidad, my native Caribbean island of Trinidad, and the news is I'm back home after more than 1 year of travel. We thank Allah who kept me safe during these travels and who brought me back home safely. It's a holiday season here, the Christmas, New Year's holiday. While others may be celebrating, we are actually located in a perilous moment in our history in this country. And we are on the doorstep of war. United States waging war on Venezuela. That can happen anytime. And what are the implications, not only for Venezuela, not only for the region, not only for the United States, but most of all, what are the implications for Trinidad and Tobago of this most dangerous moment in our history? And we are very fortunate to have in my dear friend and brother, David Abdullah, a political analyst who has consistently maintained integrity in his analysis, to be with us here today to share with us his views on the implications of this confrontation, the United States confronting Venezuela, political implications, economic implications, monetary implications for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, and of course, most of all, military implications. We're grateful to IBN for hosting this session, and may Allah have mercy on the soul of our dear brother Inshan Ismail, who passed away while I was abroad. May Allah have mercy on his soul and forgive him his sins and grant him a place in Jannah, in heaven. We have agreed with IBN that they would broadcast this session 3 times, inshallah, during this holiday season. But on the 3rd occasion, when the broadcast is made, we want to be here in the studios so that we can have a call-in session after the broadcast. And whether you are local or whether you are abroad, anywhere else in the world, you can call in with your questions, but more importantly, call in with your views on the subject, because what is happening in the Caribbean now with Venezuela is making news all around the world. So this is some background information of what's going to happen in this session today and what's going to be happening in the next 2 weeks or so. We look forward to listening to your views when we have that call-in session. So welcome, David. It's good to see you again after some time, and we are honored to have you with us.
Maulana, thank you very much. Wonderful to see you after a long period of time. And thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts and discuss this critical issue. And let me also pay my own respects to the late Inshan Ismail. We interacted on quite a few occasions during the many demonstrations that were organized, initiated by the concerned Muslims of Trinidad and Tobago, but we supported it as MSJ, and I got other civil society organizations to join in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who were, of course, going through the genocide by the Zionist state of Israel. And Inshan was very much a part of all of those demonstrations that we had in different parts of Trinidad. So he continued to hold fast, and this station, IBN, of course, is one of his legacy projects.
Yes, I think I'm going to have to organize another session devoted to Inshan, who has done a great job for this Muslim community, at least by this Islamic Broadcasting Network which he established. And may Allah have mercy on his soul. Now then, David, the United States began this drama by declaring that they are pursuing drug trafficking. And then they started blowing up boats in the Caribbean Sea. But they always consistently said, we're going to also attack land attacks. But our target is the drug trafficking. But now we see a maritime blockade around Venezuela, preventing oil shipments and the seizure of oil tankers. We want to begin by drawing attention to the viewing audience of this background to the confrontation now taking place. The United States has accused not only Venezuelans, but the government of Venezuela of being involved in drug trafficking. The United States also rejects the legitimacy of the Venezuelan government and put a ransom on his head. I think it's $50 million now. And finally, I don't know how the world is responding to it, but Trump now says that Venezuelan oil belongs to the United States. Maybe he should see a medical attention for his mental faculty there. What are your initial thoughts on this confrontation?
Yes, Malala, thank you very much for tracing that bit of that background. So about the middle of August, the United States sent several destroyers, about 6 or 7 destroyers with guided missile capability, a nuclear submarine, several amphibious landing craft, and about 5,000 Marines to the Southern Caribbean. So this was a major military intervention in the Southern Caribbean. And as soon as we saw that, we said, this is going to be about regime change in Venezuela. It's something that Trump in his first presidency had wanted to achieve, but didn't. And then, in fact, going back to President Obama started the sanctions against Venezuela that were intensified by Trump 1.0, and then Biden also intensified them. And you mentioned the bounty, quote unquote, on President Maduro's head. President Biden put a $25 million US bounty on President Maduro's head, and Trump 2.0 doubled that to 50 million US. So when we saw that flotilla coming into the Southern Caribbean, we knew that that was really about regime change. The US talked about narco trafficking, but lo and behold, just before that, sometime in June or July, the United Nations Commission on Organized Crime published their findings, so it's a 2025 report, which said that the cocaine, which is largely produced in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, and so on, but largely in Colombia, that 85% of that cocaine goes to the United States via the Pacific coast, Colombia's Pacific coast, or through Ecuador and up the Pacific to the United States. Another 8% goes via the Western Caribbean through Central America then. And then about 5% is actually trafficked through Venezuela. But the Venezuelan authorities normally get, this is the UN data, normally get about half of it. So about 2.5% escapes Colombia through Venezuela and doesn't necessarily go to the US, a lot of that goes to Europe. That data was confirmed by a report by the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States itself, which also said that most of the cocaine does not come this way, does not go through Venezuela. Venezuela has no processing facilities, does not grow cocaine or coke the coca plant, and doesn't process it either. Mr. Trump talked about fentanyl because that is a major narcotic that is affecting Americans today when they consume it. But fentanyl is not produced in South America. A lot of it is produced in Mexico and then transits across the border from Mexico into the United States. So the whole narrative about narco trafficking was very much, and we said that I made my first statement, I think, was on the 21st of August, right after this military buildup. And I gave a very detailed statement. And I said, narco trafficking narrative is similar to what Colin Powell and Bush used, weapons of mass destruction, as the rationale to invade Iraq and to kill Saddam Hussein and create, well, mayhem afterwards, of course, in Iraq. So it was very clear to us that there's this false narrative that was being pushed, and that the real agenda was, as you mentioned, the resources of Venezuela, because Venezuela sits upon the largest reserves of oil in the world. And in 2023, Trump, was not in office anymore, but made the statement that had he stayed, Maduro's government would have collapsed. He actually said that. We were very close to having the government collapse, and then we would have had all the oil. So let me just quote the exact thing. So in 2023, quote Trump, "When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil."
Okay, this is Trump speaking.
That is Trump speaking in 2023.
We would have gotten all that oil.
We would have gotten all that oil. So one thing about Trump is that he says what is in his mind. A lot of the other US presidents try to hide it and deflect, but he often comes out very openly and says it up front. We would have gotten all that oil. So he had that agenda for Venezuela's wealth, Venezuela's oil, which he recently repeated, as you have said, that Venezuela's oil belongs to the US, or all that oil belongs to the US. But I think there's another objective, which is not Trump's. Trump is very much about resources and controlling the minerals. If you remember, he offered Ukraine a deal in the war with Russia.
Rare
Earth, precisely. Recently, for the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, a so-called peace deal, which is not really a peace deal, but again, DRC, which is very resource-rich in gold and diamonds and rare earth, U.S. must get that. So he's always about those resources that other countries have that he wants for the United States and for his buddies, his billionaire buddies. The other person, though, that's driving an agenda in Venezuela is Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and also National Security Advisor. So he wears two hats, very, very powerful person in the Trump administration. Marco Rubio comes from Miami, parents from Cuba. So he comes from the Cuban-American community in Miami, which has been historically extremely hostile, violently so, to the Cuban Revolution. Marco Rubio wants to end the Cuban Revolution. And one way he thinks of doing that is to end the process in Venezuela. And that, therefore, will remove a certain support in terms of a major country for Cuba. And one of the oil tankers that was seized a few days ago
was on its way to Cuba.
And Cuba is going through great difficulty right now with the blockade and the designation of Cuba as a country that is sponsor of terrorism, a state sponsor of terrorism, which is not. How we got on that so-called list is because Cuba was facilitating the peace negotiations between some of the armed groups, the FARC in particular, and the Colombian government. And they actually brokered up a peace deal. But those negotiations were taking place in Havana, where it was safe for everybody to be. And because FARC representatives were in Havana, the Americans say, well, the Cubans are supporting state sponsors of terrorism, which was the opposite of what Cuba was doing. They were trying to end conflict in Colombia. So Cuba is hurting, and they've been hit by hurricanes, as we know. And so, starving them of oil coming out of Venezuela puts more pressure on the Cubans. And that's Marco Rubio's agenda. But it's not a good situation for us at all. And eventually, a couple of us made a statement the other day, and one of the taglines was, "What is in the dark must come to light." And so it was about narco trafficking. That's what they claimed. We said no. It's about regime change and getting the oil. Mr. Trump now has not talking about narco trafficking anymore. He's saying, we want all that oil. And if I could give another quote by Trump, he said just about a week ago, all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. Previously stole from us, yes? And then Stephen Miller, who's a key person in the Trump administration. He is the Homeland Security Advisor, but he's ideologically the person who authored Agenda 2025, which was this very racist, right-wing, white supremacist agenda for the United States. And Stephen Miller said just recently, he said, I'm quoting, "American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property."
So that is why he said belongs to us.
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, that people from the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, and so on, went to work in the oil fields of Maracaibo. And there's still Trinidadians who have families in Venezuela. And of course, Venezuelans work in the oil industry as well. And yes, it was American oil companies that were there, but they were extracting the wealth from Venezuela, enriching the United States and enriching the elites within Venezuela. That benefited from that relationship.
Yes. While the poor in Venezuela remain permanently poor.
That's right.
David, since the secret is now out, a very badly kept secret, that the real objective of the American confrontation against Venezuela is regime change. We now back to the Monroe Doctrine, that the United States, by divine or decree, the United States has the right to maintain its control over the entire Western Hemisphere by divine decree. And every government in the Central and South America, even Canada and the Caribbean, must submit to American dominance. This is the Monroe Doctrine. No extra hemispheric power is allowed to meddle in this part of the world without our consent. For the benefit of our viewing audience, this is the Monroe Doctrine, which is maybe 1800 and...
It's a little over 200 years, about 201, 202
200 years or more.
Yes.
But the Monroe Doctrine itself forms part of something else called Pax Americana. That we not only are divinely ordained to establish our dominance over the Western Hemisphere, we are divinely ordained to establish our dominance over the world.
That's right.
Is Pax Americana. I want to shift from Venezuela for just a moment, and then we come back.
Sure.
Because I would like to hear your views on Pax Americana as to whether or not Pax Americana is now in decline, whether the US dollar is now in decline, and whether Trump has given up Pax Americana and is now content to have a local Pax Americana only in his backyard. And this explains his policies towards Ukraine, and he's not prepared to allow the European Union to stand in the way of what he wants to achieve in Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, very, very, very key question. What has happened is that we have seen the rise, particularly of China, of Russia to a certain extent, but particularly of China, as a major power in the world. Economic power, China's economy is not far behind that of the United States. Technologically, China is probably ahead of the United States. Some time ago, China launched its own open source AI chat box, which rivaled, the American versions and so on, which cost a lot of money. And in terms of things like solar power, electric vehicles, a whole range of technologies, China is actually well ahead of the United States. Militarily, China very quietly has built up its military to be very strong as well, because China has not had to spend money on fighting wars. The United States has spent a huge amount of money fighting wars or supporting countries like Israel in their war and genocide in the Middle East. So with that, we have then had the development of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and there are other countries now that have also joined the BRICS. And what we are seeing are the development of many economic trading blocs that are encouraging and facilitating South-South trade, where countries of the global South are more engaged with the other. China has the Belt and Road Initiative, major investments in this part of the world and in Africa and so on. So what in Africa, you had the development in the countries of the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, throwing out French colonialism.
I plan to visit Burkina Faso next year. Go
Fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that you're able to do these travels, Maulana. And they throw out French colonialism. So you're seeing the development of what is popularly now called multipolarity.
Multipolarity.
A multipolar world. In other words, not a single pole of the United States around which everybody has to revolve or everybody has to genuflect. And so I do think that Biden, when he was president, was trying to restore Pax Americana. Mm-hmm. He made this statement after he became president, America is back. And when he said America is back, in my view, that meant that America was going to be once. He was trying to make it preeminent over everybody else, and therefore would determine what happened in Ukraine, in the Far East, and so on. And I think that Trump is, because he's more transactional, is, while he sees China as a threat, is certainly trying to say this hemisphere must not be influenced or controlled by anybody else besides the United States. And just a few weeks ago, the Trump administration published their national security strategy. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing because I've been very busy.
Part of it, yeah.
Right. And I'll just quote one part of it because it's relevant to what you're saying. It said, one objective is, quote, to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere.
In the Western Hemisphere.
We will deny non-hemispheric competitors, and I put in brackets, China and Russia.
China and Russia. And Iran.
And Iran, yes. The ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, and this is even more critical, or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere.
Vital assets and resources.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, he even says this is now the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
Already.
Yes, they're describing it as a Trump corollary to the Monroe, Doctrine, right? And is a common sense and potent restoration of American power and priorities consistent with American security interests.
So you are in agreement that we are seeing a decline or an irreversible decline of Pax Americana and a concentration of attention on the Monroe Doctrine for the Western Hemisphere.
Yes, and of course, they will use proxies in certain parts of the world where it's strategically important for them.
Right.
Israel,
Yes.
critical, and in relation to the oil and everything else in the Middle East.
Would you join Pakistan in that with Israel?
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. The irony is that, of course, India also has a relationship with Israel.
Yes.
You know,
not so much
as
spectacularly presented to the world as Pakistan.
yes, and Pakistan proposing Trump to win, to get the Nobel Peace
To the
Prize.
eternal shame and disgrace of the world of Islam, yes.
Yes. So yes, that's an interesting one. I hadn't given that much thought. But
Okay.
that is certainly of
I'm
significance.
pursuing this discussion because I want to get a view from you as to whether the concentration of attention now on the Monroe Doctrine and the new Trump version of the Monroe Doctrine and the receding of Pax Americana implies that we are almost certain to see war.
In the sense that, yes, but they're going to pick and choose the war. So one against Venezuela, but they're not going to go to war with China or with Russia.
No. We're talking about the Western
Localized,
Hemisphere. I'm
yes,
talking about
yes.
war
In
in
this
this part of the
hemisphere.
world. That we are almost certain that tomorrow there's going to be war with Venezuela. That's what I want to hear.
Yes, I think so, because Trump has backed himself into a corner. After the initial military assets which they put in the Southern Caribbean, they then put F-35 fighter jets in Puerto Rico, B-52 bombers in Puerto Rico, and then they brought in the world's largest battleship, USS Gerald Ford, which doesn't travel by itself. It travels with a flotilla of other destroyers and other assets. So there are probably about 15 or more thousand Marines in the Southern Caribbean now. So that kind of deployment, you can't just turn it around
You can't walk away from
and
it.
walk away from it
No.
with nothing in your hand.
Yeah. That's one way of looking at the subject. That America, instead of looking great again, will look small
Yes.
if you walk away from it.
That's right.
But our approach to the subject is the Monroe Doctrine being more dominant now than it was before because Pax Americana is receding.
Yes.
Okay?
No, the question would be, how would they want regime change because they want to get the resources of Venezuela. How is regime change going to be achieved? So there are like 2 or 3 military, if you wish, strategies that could achieve that. One would be a surgical drone strike or missile strike, which kills President Maduro and some of the other leaders of the government and of the party. And then perhaps street protests and people coming in. That's one option. But the military in Venezuela, I think, is still very loyal to President Maduro. A second option would be the blockade, which they're doing now, trying to create as much economic and social dislocation. Because in the last 2 or 3 years, Venezuela's economy has been growing faster than any other economy in Latin America.
Already?
Yes. They've recovered. One, oil production moved from 200,000 or 300,000 barrels up to about close to 1 million barrels a day, which is below where it was at their maximum, but it gives them a significant amount of revenue. But they've also become significantly self-reliant in terms of their food production. We've had some people going to Venezuela recently, several delegations, and they moved about and so on. and they're growing a lot of their own food. Inflation is very low, and so the food is plentiful. The government, of course, provides a lot of housing, electricity is low, there's healthcare, education. So the quality of life of Venezuelans has actually significantly improved compared to, say, 5-6 years ago when things were very difficult, when the sanctions were biting and some of the economic policies were out of whack and you got hyperinflation and so on. So perhaps if they squeeze Venezuela with the blockade, they may hope that that could precipitate some kind of social unrest and bring about regime change. I don't think either of those things will happen, because the irony of it, which of course Americans never factor in, is that the Venezuelans are highly patriotic and nationalistic, because they fought for their independence. And so when a foreign power now tries to overthrow and intervene, instead of them saying, yes, let us overthrow the government, they actually are cohering around the government to repel a foreign intervention. And so the government has armed the militia, and there are old people, women and so on, who say, I want to sign up for the militia because I'm prepared to die for my country. So the third option would be an actual war, bombing, and then land troops and so on. But 15,000 Marines is not sufficient to engage in a land war in a country the size of Venezuela, and with Venezuela's military capability. When they went into Panama, I think they went in at about 30,000. Panama is much smaller, and the Panamanian military was much weaker. So Trump now is in a bit of a bind. If he wants to go and actually have war, is he simply going to try to bomb the living daylights out of Venezuela? That will destabilize the entire Latin America.
That's what I'm coming to now. This is the political and economic implications of war. But let's first begin with the military implications. Russia entered into an agreement with Venezuela last year for the transfer to Venezuela of advanced Russian weaponry. Amongst the most famous, well-known of advanced Russian weaponry is the hypersonic missiles, not necessarily nuclear armed. Now then, what are the implications if Venezuela already possesses Russian hypersonic nuclear weapons? Number one, for American warships, because these are unstoppable missiles in the naval flotilla. Number two, and more importantly for us, the airport in Tobago, which has a US-installed radar, military radar. And I don't know where the radar in Trinidad is located. Is it in Piaco?
It has, I'm not aware that it has been installed yet, but it is probably going to be installed soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Venezuela, I believe, time for a break. Okay. Let us hold on until after the break and we continue the discussion here. We were speaking just now about the Russian treaty with Venezuela, which was promulgated last year, which provided, among other things, for the transfer to Venezuela of advanced Russian weaponry. The most famous and the most readily available of advanced Russian weaponry would be hypersonic missiles, which in some instances are unstoppable. The distance between Venezuela and the Caribbean Sea, the Venezuela, Trinidad, and Venezuela and Tobago, is so small that it seems almost impossible to stop those weapons unless you have anti-missile in Tobago, in Trinidad, which we don't have at this time. What would be your views in the event that Venezuela already has such missiles and war breaks out, as we, both of us are in agreement now that it is inevitable that war will come, because it'll make, if the war does not take place, Trump will have a very big problem. Yeah. What are the implications in the event that Venezuela has such missiles, and the United States then starts attacking land targets in Venezuela, and Venezuela uses such missiles in the Caribbean Sea against the naval flotilla, and against Tobago, the airport with the radar, and Trinidad, Piaco Airport?
Yes, very, very major implications. I mean, some time ago, in the media, it was very public, President Maduro did show off some of the Russian assets, military assets. It wasn't hypersonic missiles, but it was, I think, an air defense system. So they do have artillery to deal with taking down missiles that are incoming into Venezuela. And these were Russian. And he said so very clearly. And that is what he showed. Now, sometimes in these matters, it is not what you are shown, is what is not shown that becomes important. And it may not only be Russian hypersonic missiles, there may also be Iranian hypersonic missiles, because Iran also has. And of course, Iran has a relationship with Venezuela as well. So while the traditional U.S. media says that Venezuela's military capability is outdated because their planes are outdated, et cetera, I don't think that the analysts really know what Venezuela possesses or does not possess. Certainly, what Venezuela possesses can effect significant casualties on the Americans. Because if there are troops that land, then there'll be ground fighting. Because they can't land with tanks and all of that. That's not going to be possible, given the terrain. So it's going to be a lot of ground fighting. And clearly, there'll be body bags going back to the United States. So that we could discuss that afterwards. That's a political implication for Trump. If a war breaks out, then the radar in Tobago, and recently the reports in the media that show it's not just the radar itself, but there is an area next to the radar, or where the radar is located, where there are some buildings and tents and so on, which means that there are American Marines operating the radar there. Oh, so okay. It is almost like a mini base. Okay. It's a mini base. It's not a big base, but whether it's a big base or a small base, the fact is that there are American military personnel, and the Prime Minister here said, yes, there are Americans here now. She denied, and eventually had to admit. So there are American military troops in Tobago. There's a military radar. And contrary to the false narrative that was being peddled by the government, that this is about trying to pick up smugglers of ganja and cocaine, that military radar, according to the specifications by the manufacturer and by analysts here, and even a radio report that came out of Guantanamo Bay, the U.S. base in Guantanamo Bay, where a U.S. Military official, she said that this is about war between the U.S. and Venezuela. That's what the radar is there for. So, and the Prime Minister now admits that the radar is there for Trinidad and Tobago's defense. But if you have a U.S. military base and a radar located in Tobago, then that becomes a legitimate target in the event of a war between Venezuela and the United States. Quite clearly. For Venezuela to attack. Quite clearly, yes. Yes?
No one will deny that, yes. Go ahead.
And therefore, if the Venezuelans attack it, and of course, it therefore means that people's lives could be lost in Tobago, because the population of Tobago is clustered
In the south.
in the south, near the Crown Point Airport, the NI International Airport. That's where a lot of the tourism plant
That's
of
right.
Tobago is located. And therefore, the impact will be possible loss of life, property damage, and then you have investor.
The airport will be destroyed.
The airport could be badly damaged, if not destroyed, because those missiles that come in may not be pinpoint accurate to take out the radar. You know, it could miss the radar by a few yards, and then it destroys the runway and it destroys the new terminal building. So there is also a loss of tourist arrivals and a whole set of other factors.
The tourist economy, and therefore the Tobago economy, will collapse.
It would, yes, because it is, apart from the THA, tourism is the only other economic activity. in
What are the
Tobago.
political implications then of a military attack on Tobago to take out the radar, and which possibly could take out the airport, and the consequent loss of lives in Tobago as never before in history, and the collapse of the Tobago economy?
Well, I think that there are two implications. One is in relation to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, because the government of Trinidad and Tobago has maintained that we are not involved in any conflict with Venezuela, when of course, if you tie yourself to the country that is in conflict, then ipso facto you are also in the
Complicit.
conflict. Yeah, exactly. And therefore, the narrative that the government has been carrying with respect to, this is about narco trafficking, that mask has dropped. And so the population of Trinidad and Tobago will have to then judge the credibility of the Prime Minister and her judgment on this particular issue. The second implication, of course, is for Tobago. There are THA elections for the Tobago House of Assembly. Let me elaborate, because I know we have many viewers outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So the elections for the local body of governance in Tobago is called the Tobago House of Assembly.
That's right.
And the elections for the Tobago House of Assembly takes place on the 12th of January. And so already the issue of the radar and other installations has become a major political point of contention, because the party that is now in charge of the House of Assembly, the Tobago People's Party, led by a young man, Fali Augustine, they maintained a relationship with the government. So the issue, and he said that initially he accepted the information that was provided by the government, the Prime Minister and the ministers to him, as for the justification of the radar in Tobago. But now he's beginning to pull back. And he has said, if he had the choice, which he doesn't have, because he doesn't have that power, but if he had that power, he would not have allowed the radar to be in Tobago. The other political parties contesting the election in Tobago are saying the radar should go. They do not wish it to be there. So it's going to be interesting to see what the immediate political implication, even if the elections happen on the 12th of January and there's no war yet, what are the political implications for that election in Tobago? And then the other thing would be, because the issue of the autonomy of Tobago from Trinidad has been on the front, well, has been alive for a long time, and it is being put back on the front burner in this period. And so we can see a greater push for what is known as autonomy. How that autonomy is being defined is not that clear by some. Some may, however, suggest that Tobago should be separately governed, with the Tobago House of Assembly being a legislature, which could then pass laws for Tobago, and to have other powers and so on, and therefore to have a federal arrangement between Tobago and Trinidad, in the same way that St. Kitts and Nevis, both of which much tinier islands than Trinidad and Tobago. There's a federal arrangement between...
Oh, yes, they do?
Yes, yes.
St. Kitts and Nevis.
It's a federal arrangement.
A federal arrangement.
It's not a unitary state.
Not a unity. And do the different units of the federation have political equality?
Not to the extent that I think the Tobagonians want, but it is a federal arrangement. I think some people have argued that, like the United Kingdom, Scotland has a legislature, the Scottish Parliament, which makes laws, and Scotland has a certain amount of autonomy.
Scotland is issuing its own money, and the Scottish pound and the British pound are interchangeable?
Yes.
It's illegal anyway in Britain not to accept the Scottish pound?
Right.
Go ahead.
Yes, so that kind of level of autonomy, I think, is what some in Tobago may wish to have. In which, if that was to happen, then, and you have a federal Trinidad and Tobago, then an issue like the radar would not be the sole decision of Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad. It will then be, Tobago would have to be involved in a decision such as that.
What I'm asking is anger, tremendous anger in Tobago in the event of a Venezuelan missile strike, taking out the radar and taking out the airport and killing people and collapsing the tourist economy. Could Tobagonian anger, unparalleled anger, force the issue by seeking secession from Trinidad to be replaced with a federal republic?
I think it could. I think it could. Tobagonians are fiercely Tobagonian. Their identity as Tobagonians, they have that sense of nationalism, which is why, for example, and politically, there has always been a Tobago nationalist party, as distinct from the People's National Movement, which has support in Tobago, obviously, and has controlled Tobago politically at various points in time. But that is seen as a Trinidad-located party with the Tobago arm of the PNM having a certain amount of autonomy, but they're still under the control of the central party. But there's always been a Tobago nationalist party, going back to the days of the 50s with Fargo James, ATP James, and so on, and A&R Robinson, who contested the elections in Tobago first, lost for the PNM, lost initially until he won later on. So and then you had, when Robinson broke with the PNM in 1970, his political party then won in 1976 parliamentary elections, the DAC, Democratic Action Congress. They won the 2 parliamentary seats in Tobago. And in 1981, they won again. 1986, they formed a coalition with parties in Trinidad, the National Alliance for Reconstruction, and Robinson became Prime Minister. And the THA was controlled by the Tobago Nationalist Party, DAC or NAR, for very many years, for 15, 20 years, until the PNM then controlled, and then it went back to Tobago nationalism, and Tobago Nationalist Party. And the party in control of the THA today, Tobago People's Party, TPP, and it's interesting, Tobago People's Party, won on the basis of nationalism.
Nationalism. Okay, we have looked at Tobago and the implications in the event of war with Venezuela, of a Venezuelan missile attack to take out the raiders in Tobago, and the possibility of the destruction of the Tobago airport, collapse of the Tobago economy, the political implications, the economic implications. What if Tobago is so vulnerable? Trinidad is far more vulnerable because the closest distance between Venezuela and Trinidad is only 9 miles. Yeah. 9 miles, yes. So what will be the implications? I know this is going to be a difficult question. What will be the implications in Trinidad, political and economic, of a missile strike striking Trinidad?
Well, that's massive. I mean, the Venezuelans, let me tell you quite openly, have reinforced their coastal defenses.
Okay.
And those coastal defenses are not just on the northern coast, which is the Caribbean coast of Venezuela, but on their eastern coast. And their eastern coast, part of it is Gulf of Paria, right, which, as you say, is and then, of course, going further south of Trinidad, that's the eastern coast. And they've strengthened their coastal defenses all around. It therefore means that they would have military capability to attack Trinidad. And there have been threats. I mean, the Minister of Justice made some statements, and sometimes I would say those statements ought not to be made, but I'm not him, and I'm not in Venezuela. That's their determination. But the Minister of Justice, Diosdado Cabello, is actually a very powerful individual in Venezuela. He's one of the deputy leaders of the ruling party, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. When President Chavez was ill, he had a choice to make as to who he would recommend to the party to succeed him.
Yeah.
The two persons, one was Nicolas Maduro, and the other was Diosdado Cabello.
Okay.
Some in Venezuela, and I just get this from talking to friends and so on, some people thought that it would have been Cabello, but it wasn't. It was Maduro that was chosen by Chavez. He had his reasons. Not judging. But in other words, Diosdado Cabello has been for a long time a very powerful political figure in Venezuela. So when he speaks, his words are not to be taken lightly. He's not just another minister, all right? He has a lot of weight in Venezuela. And he said recently that, Venezuela doesn't want to hurt the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But he said, Madam, meaning the Prime Minister, if Venezuela is attacked and Trinidad and Tobago is part of that, there are implications for Trinidad and Tobago. Already, even without a missile strike, the government of Venezuela has cancelled all of the energy agreements that had been previously signed. So not only is the famous or infamous Dragon gas deal now no longer possible once the government of Venezuela remains the same, and that is the easiest gas for Trinidad and Tobago to get because it's very close to the north coast of Trinidad. And once that gas comes out, well, Venezuela's gas. So we need Venezuela's permission to produce the gas. It just means running a pipeline from the Dragon field to an existing platform, which is a shell platform off the north coast. And then that shell platform already has pipelines that take the gas down to Point Lisas and to Point Fortin. So that was an easy project. That is now not going to happen once the status quo remains. The second, there are two other gas fields, which are cross-border fields, the Lorraine Manatee and the Coquina Manikin fields. Now, those cross-border fields straddle the maritime border between Trinidad and Venezuela, which means that the gas, of course, under the sea doesn't know where the maritime boundary is. But Venezuela agreed to allow Trinidad and Tobago to produce the gas on our side of the border. So they quantified it. So let us say there are 10 trillion cubic feet of gas in these gas fields, and 6 trillion is estimated to be on the Venezuelan side and 4 trillion on our side. Venezuela said, okay, you could produce up to 4 trillion cubic feet of gas, after which you can't produce because you're now producing Venezuelan gas. Now, if Venezuela has now said they're canceling all the agreements, it could mean that they don't want us to produce any gas even though it's on our side of the border, because you have to have their agreement, because if you produce, you could be producing their gas too, yes? So all of that is up in the air, which has an impact on our economy. The government has said quite wrongly, oh, we don't need Venezuelan gas. Well, the reality is that we're not producing enough gas in Trinidad and Tobago right now, and our plants are shutting down. 1 out of the 4 LNG plants is down. Nutrien, a major producer of ammonia, has shut down completely. Some of the other major methanol plants have shut down and so on. So we are in difficulty. And to get new gas takes years. There are some projects that BP and other companies have that are coming on stream, but that will just kind of increase gas production a little bit, but not significantly enough to enable all of our petrochemical plants to operate at 100% capacity. So the reality is that our economy is already being affected. Maybe the Prime Minister believes that the Americans will get rid of Maduro, and the woman who obscenely got the Nobel Peace Prize the other day, Maria Machado, will become president of Venezuela. She has already said to a U.S. investment forum that the trillions of dollars of oil and gold and everything else is available to you to exploit, right? So maybe that is what Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is hoping for, and then that Machado, being president, will then say, okay, Trinidad and Tobago, you could get dragon gas, and Rubio will give us a OFAC license to produce it and everything. That may be her gamble, but it's a gamble. Because if there's a missile strike by Venezuela and it hits a gas processing facility in Trinidad, or a pipeline, it could be in Point Lucius, or it could be Guayagüari, where the gas comes ashore. It could be anywhere.
Okay.
It could just be one of the major pipelines running, so anything like that, it doesn't even have to hit Maulana. It could just fly over Trinidad.
Yeah.
And that would create a huge crisis for us. That could create a huge crisis for us. So Mrs. Prasad Bisesa said the Americans will defend us. The radar is there to defend us. But the issue, she's putting the horse before the cart, the cart before the horse, because we would not be in danger of an attack from Venezuela if we had not taken this position to be complicit and totally united with Washington's colonial and imperial agenda. That is what put us in danger. And that is why she now hopes the Americans will defend us, because we're in danger. But how did we get into a position of danger? We got into a position of danger because of the positions the government took.
The purpose of this discussion is to inform the public of implications of what is now about to take place. Tell me, in the event that the United States attacks Venezuela, and then Venezuela responds with a missile attack anywhere in Trinidad, what would be the implications, number one, politically in the country, this island, number two, for the economy, and number three, for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar?
Yes, they're all interlinked. I mean, if the missile actually was fired at Trinidad and Tobago, or Trinidad, even if it did not hit anything, but it whistled overhead and so on, of course, psychologically, there'll be fear and panic. You weren't here, but a couple of months ago, about a month and a half ago, on a Friday afternoon, there was a report coming out of the United States. I got it on my phone, so it was not a wild social media rant. It came from the New York Times, Washington Post, saying that their information was that Trump was about to announce an imminent attack on Venezuela. Now, it didn't happen, but that was the report. When that happened, at the same time, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force hierarchy summoned all the members of the Defense Force back to base. And the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service called all the police officers to cancel their leave. All of this happened within like an hour and a half. And everybody was aware in Trinidad and Tobago what was happening. And there was panic in town, traffic jam, people trying to get out of town. a number of government offices and institutions closed early, and so on. And so there was a lot of fear. People went to the supermarket to buy. Some people went by the gas stations to stock up and fill their tanks and so on. So and that was just, reports of something taking place. That not actually shots fired, but that something may have happened. In the event that something does happen, as a country, as a people, we are totally unprepared for that. Totally unprepared. So there'll be a lot of psychological impacts, fear, trauma, anxiety. Do people send their children to school? Do you not send your children to school? Those basic day-to-day things. Do I go to work? Do I not go to work? And so on. So at the level of people's human existence, that gets impacted. Secondly, in terms of the economy, well, businesses will be closed. Any possibility of new investment coming in will be on hold because no investor is going to put in money in a situation where a country has instability. And people, those who have US dollars, or capital flight will be exacerbated. There's already capital flight. So more capital flight will take place, which means US dollars will flow out of Trinidad and Tobago, which worsens our foreign exchange problem. And that then has implications for the value of the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, and so on. So all of these things are implications.
What will be the implications for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar?
Ultimately, there would be a devaluation.
There will be a devaluation.
Ultimately, yes. If there's capital flight and our foreign exchange reserves drop precipitously, then the government may have no other choice but to go to the IMF, and the IMF would then say you have to devalue your dollar. That is because the IMF has wanted us to devalue for many years.
There is the official market and there is the black market.
The black market rate, of course, as we all know, is much higher than the official rate.
What were the implications in the unofficial market?
Oh, that tends to escalate. Well, because the official rate, they could try to hold it for a while. Ultimately, can't hold. But the black market rate will simply
skyrocket.
Oh yes, that is what happens. Because
in 1970, there was looting.
1990.
1990, there was looting all over Port of Spain when there was the attempt to overthrow the government. Was there any looting in 70 in the Black Power?
I think one or two shop windows were broken in one or two places, but nothing of significance. No.
Is there the possibility of a missile strike on Trinidad provoking looting?
I haven't thought about that. I mean, it's all these things. In other words, the whole scenario of normal life changes when a war happens.
Yeah.
Everything changes. And so at another level, people will flee a war zone. So like if Venezuela is a war zone, you're going to get huge outward migration. And Venezuelans will come to Trinidad as one location that they would want to come
influx of refugees here and an influx in the United States.
Well, certainly into Colombia and Brazil.
True Colombia
and Guyana.
Okay.
It may be difficult for them to get into the U.S. given Trump's policies, but certainly, and both President Lula of Brazil, he spoke recently at the opening of a Mercosur, which is a Southern Cone trading agreement, and President Petro of Colombia have said quite clearly that if there's any war, a military aggression against Venezuela, Latin America will be completely destabilized.
Good. That's where we want to move to now. We want to look now at the implications for regional politics, for Latin American politics, for the United Nations, and for international politics. What would be the implications of a military attack on Venezuela, Trump's military attack on Venezuela in this part of the world? How would the countries of South America and Central America respond?
Colombia has quite openly said that they think that they will also be under attack.
Colombia, yes.
Because Trump has said that Petro is a narco traffickers,
Yeah.
right? When in fact Colombia has been working very hard to try and stop the cocaine trade, but
Yeah.
it's difficult, right? And they have instructed their military to beef up their defenses. And so the attack on Venezuela, quite apart from leading to migration out of Venezuela into Colombia, you might very well see, because the United States has bases in Colombia. They have several bases in Colombia. So how Colombia reacts will be interesting. And what the United States does to Colombia will be very interesting. But that generally there'll be instability. Petro has a very strong position and says, you know, and there's been talk now about Gran Colombia, which was the idea of Simon Bolivar. Because Bolivar didn't only liberate Venezuela, he liberated Colombia and Panama, because Panama was part of Colombia at one time. The Americans intervened to try to change that. And also Ecuador and Bolivia, those were all part of Bolivar's liberation efforts. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Brazil will feel pressured to support, because if the government does not, in Venezuela does not fall, but there's a war, and President Maduro or whoever is in charge of the government continues to fight the Americans, then Colombia and Brazil maybe feel obligated to support them in their battle against the United States. Not that they would send troops, but they may provide economic and other kinds of support. All of these things are possible.
Brazilian political support for Venezuela and condemnation of a United States attack on Venezuela would have repercussions on the rest of South America and Central. What about Mexico?
Yes, Mexico has taken a very strong position in support of Venezuela.
Good.
The president there, President Sheinbaum, has taken very strong positions. She's rebuffed Trump, who wanted to go into Mexico to deal with fentanyl and drug trafficking in Mexico, and she's rebuffed that. So, but on the other hand, there have been some setbacks for the left progressive forces in Latin America. Bolivia, unfortunately, there was a very bad division between President Arce, who just lost, the party lost elections recently. He didn't contest. And the founder of the movement towards socialism, Evo Morales. There was a very bad split. And that split enabled the right wing to win the elections in Bolivia some months ago. And that was very, very bad. And I'm aware that, you know, efforts were made by leaders of major countries in Latin America and so on to get those two, Arce and Evo Morales, to patch themselves up because they knew that a division would simply allow the right wing to come in, which is exactly what has happened. In Honduras, there's been an election which has not yet been declared because there's quite clearly a lot of electoral fraud. And that is where Trump said 2 days before the elections that if you don't vote for this candidate, the right-wing candidate, then I'm going to sanction you. And of course, that scared a lot of Hondurans to vote for this guy. So that election is up in the air, but there was a progressive government in Honduras for a few years, but they now seem to be out. So there's a lot of efforts by the U.S. to have in Latin America and the Caribbean governments that are with them in accordance with their national security strategy, which says, you know, that we want to have, let me just find that particular quote. This is a national security strategy. We will reward and encourage the region's governments, political parties, and movements broadly aligned with our principles and strategy. So they are clearly intervening directly. In accordance with the Monroe Doctrine, now the Trump corollary, to make sure that right throughout the Western Hemisphere, there are governments that are supportive of Washington's position.
This is the response of governments. What about people? Are we likely to see individuals traveling to Venezuela from Latin America and the Caribbean to join in support of Venezuela's armed response to an American military intervention?
There may be a few coming out of the Caribbean, but not many. But certainly out of Latin America.
Out of Latin America.
I could see them going to Venezuela, yeah.
Number one, the implications for Trinidad and for Tobago. Number two, implications for Latin America. Now, what would be the response at the United Nations of an American attack on Venezuela and Venezuela taking the matter to the Security Council? Number two, how would Russia, China, and Iran respond?
So Venezuela has already gone to the United Nations with respect to the general aggression by the U.S., asking for a debate. I do not think that debate has happened yet, but they also are now reporting to the UN Security Council the seizure of the tankers.
Of the tankers.
Clearly, Russia and China will support, the Venezuelan position. The United States will simply veto it. And therefore, the Security Council will make no decision because it has to be, any decision on the Security Council has to be with the support of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The U.S. will simply use its veto power to stymie that. But the matter will get aired. At the level of the General Assembly, they may very well have, more leeway, but the General Assembly has no power. They may have moral suasion, but no power to enforce. China has warned the United States not to do anything against Venezuela. They publicly said so. It seems as if, excuse me, one of the tankers that was seized may have actually been going to China.
Okay.
Which raises major implications for China. But I don't see China or Russia or Iran trying to engage the United States in a firefight. The Venezuelans have said they're going to ask their Navy to escort the tankers out of the Caribbean. I haven't seen that happen yet, we're not sure. But if that happens, and if, for example, oil is going to China, the Chinese decide they want to escort their tanker out, that could have an implication. Will the Americans try to stop that? So the UN, I think, Secretary General did make a statement recently about the need to have diplomacy and not to have any military intervention. Interestingly, the Pope Leo, made a statement some time ago, a couple of weeks ago, saying that there should be no military intervention to bring about change in Venezuela. That was an interesting point, given the fact that, of course, Venezuela is very significantly Catholic in population. So we have to see what the international community will do. The Europeans, I think, are going to go with Washington already. Of course, Britain has Venezuelan gold sitting in the Bank of England for years, illegally, although the courts in England have said it's not illegal, but in my view it's illegal. And so, you know where the Europeans are going to go against Venezuela, because part of the strategy is to try to ensure that you have in government right throughout the hemisphere and elsewhere in the world parties that align with what they call Western values. And Western values translates into the values of capital, unbridled capitalism, where a few people can become multi-billionaires at the expense of billions of the world's population.
When we turn to values, we turn to moral and religious implications of what's now taking place. And clearly, Venezuela has the right to choose its own government without countries outside attempting to intervene. The United States raised a hullabaloo about Russia intervening in American elections in 2020, I think it was.
Yes.
A hullabaloo, which eventually fizzled out. But that's the same thing that's happening now, regime change. And therefore, I am of the view, now let me express my own views for the first time, that what we're seeing now is an oppressor imposing his will on the oppressed. And in Venezuela, not only is the government supported by the military, but is supported by the oppressed masses, the poor masses of Venezuela. And people who have a moral conscience, people who live the religious way of life, should support the oppressed and stand up against the oppressor. And this brings us now to an interesting part of our discussion, that we have a multi-tribal society in Trinidad and Tobago. The PNM, unfortunately, led by a graduate at Oxford University, the PNM never truly understood the implications of our tribal diversity and the political implications of our tribal diversity for political philosophy, of a coming together of tribes to forge an agreement that will allow us to live together in political equality and in fraternity. And part of the implications of being a multi-tribal society here in Trinidad, more than in Tobago, is that we have Islam, we have Christianity, we have Hinduism as powerful forces. Well, Hinduism and Christianity more than Islam. We are a small community. But you can see what we're doing here at IBN as a Muslim community. It is IBN which is showing the way for the rest of the country to bring together people to discuss the subject in a very polite and a very educated way, without slinging any mud against anybody. That's not our way. That we should be able to come together now at this critical moment for consultations at the tribal level. And I'm hoping, David, that this process of education that we've had, we've benefited from all your insights and all the knowledge and all the facts that you presented today, would help to educate our people. And I'm hoping that this session would impact upon the Muslim community, because this is Islamic, IBN, Islamic Broadcasting Network, that we can have a consultation amongst the Muslim community on what's not happening. You may call it a referendum, that Trinidad and Tobago need a referendum on this issue of relations with Venezuela and relations with the United States of America. But we in Islam, we prefer consultation to referendum. Consultation. I was speaking with Nizam, Brother Nizam Mohammed, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he was constantly focusing on this part of Islam, the process of consultation. How can we promote consultation from our session today, first of all, within the Muslim community, and then with other tribes? Perhaps our listening audience, our viewing audience, can now think about the subject of how we can have a national Muslim consultation on this subject, because we are now faced with a danger greater than this country has ever experienced in its history. I've asked LBN whether they could rebroadcast this session at least 3 times, and at the 3rd time that it is broadcast, maybe in January, we will then have a call-in session for viewers to call in on the phone and ask questions or express your views on the subject, of course, without slinging any mud against anybody, and being polite and respecting people when you ask for your views. That's our style. And we'll also open the lines for people calling from abroad. We'll give you a telephone number, a WhatsApp number, and you can call from abroad as well, free of charge. And locally you can also call. And in the event that you agree with our views that yes, we are in need of consultation at this time. It's not just a PNM matter, it's not just a UNC matter, it is a matter which concerns the whole country. And there is significant danger lying ahead, as the discussion with David has clearly represented to us, significant danger lying ahead. And we need to consult with each other. Perhaps if you get on the phone, if you are of the opinion within the Muslim community that there is someone you know who is a senior member of our community, who has the attachment to the religious way of life that commands respect, and who has the capacity and the experience to call for such a consultation, because our community is divided. So if one individual calls for that consultation, and he succeeds in getting the people to realize the danger of the moment and to put aside differences, put aside your rivalries, and come together with wisdom, peacefully, and let us have a consultation on the subject. Then if you can think of such, not me, because I live most of my life abroad now. I just came back to Trinidad after more than a year and a few months of travel. And I'm here just one week ago, so I can't do it. If you can think of someone, such a person, then call him on the phone and urge him. Call him on the phone and urge him. Why don't you make a call for such a consultation? And if you can impress upon him and he feels he can do it, let him then make the call for a consultation. Of course, he can speak with us before doing so. And if he can bring together all the different factions of our community, and we have a consultation on the subject, we set the tone for other tribes in the country to consult with each other. It's not a time for political rivalry and mudslinging. Not at all. You can see how David and I have conducted the discussion without any biting comments against anybody. Not at all. That's not our style. David, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us the very important views you've expressed today. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm sure you agree with me that we are at a moment of very great danger, and there's very great likelihood of an American armed attack on Venezuela, whether it be pinpoint strikes or it's a landing with troops landing on boots on the ground, we don't know. And once that takes place, then there's a likelihood of a Venezuelan attack on Tobago and Trinidad, and that is the danger. We hope and we pray that this initial discussion with David will set the foundation, set the grounds for us to come again to discuss the subject in the near future as events unfold. And in the meantime, we thank David for having spent the time with us today. We're grateful for his scholarship, and we're thankful for all that he's been doing so far in the moral field of promoting that which is righteous and that which has integrity in it, in political affairs, in economic affairs, in social affairs. Thank you, David, and we look forward to our next session.
Thank you very much, Maulana, for having me, and I endorse 100% the need for consultation and discussion. Unfortunately, that's not what happens in our parliament. which is where one of the locations at a national level where it should be happening, that isn't happening. And we hope that perhaps the American public opinion, 70% of the Americans don't want a war between the US and Venezuela. That's your opinion polls. So maybe that might eventually persuade Mr. Trump to find some other way of dealing with the thing. Because as singing Sandra the Calypsonian wisely sang, because nobody wins a war.
Nobody wins the war, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, David, thank you so much, and we look forward to the next session.
Thank you
All right,
very
bye-bye.
much. Thank you.